Hello and welcome. I'm Josanne Leonard. Who or what is the state? The dictionary defines it as a nation or territory considered as an organized political community under one government. It consists of three main parts: the legislature, which is the parliament, the executive, which is the government, and the judiciary, the courts. In this program, we will consider how these three parts of the state work against the backdrop of some other constitutional issues, like the separation of powers, the quality of representation, and the size, origin, and role of the cabinet. Afra Raymond, who is a chartered surveyor, managing director of Raymond & Pear Limited, and an immediate past president of the Joint Consultative Council for the Construction Industry, a newspaper columnist, and creator of AfraRaymond.net, a thinking man's weblog, would like to throw some light on some of these important constitutional considerations. Afra?
Thanks, Josanne. Well, I think if we're talking about the state and its main organs, we have to be discussing the three main branches of the state. And those three main branches are the legislature, which is really the parliament, which we're seated in now. And the parliament is the only body in the state that has the power to create a new law, repeal a law, or amend a law. The parliament also has the responsibility to superintend certain organs of the state, like the statutory bodies, TNTEC and WASA, some of the state enterprises and so on, ministries and so on, okay? There's then the executive, which is the political administration, the public service, as some people call it, the big chiefs, the Sawatis, and the executive runs the apparatus of the state. In other words, the ministries, the state agencies, the government bodies, the education service, and the police service, and so on, those are all parts of the executive. The third limb of the state is the judiciary, which has a particular responsibility to settle disputes between parties and also to superintend the conduct of parties. And those parties would include individual citizens, incorporated bodies like companies and credit unions and so on, and also the state itself. So the judiciary has a very important role in superintending how those parties conduct themselves and how they conduct disputes between themselves. And the judiciary conducts that kind of supervision in accordance with common law, precedent, and of course the statutes which emanate from the legislature. So those are the three limbs which are supposed to operate with a reasonable degree of separation to allow them to function well for us to have a healthy republic. But we're going to go a little deeper into that. And of course it's all functioning on the oil, which we don't often comment about, but the oil of a neutral civil service, neutral professional civil service, a vigilant press, and of course a concerned and a conscientious and an involved citizenry, which is why this program is so important. And I thank the Parliament channel for fostering a discussion on these important issues.
Like you said, a very, very important discussion. So let's zero in a little bit. Origin, size, and rules are areas that you've expressed a number of concerns over time, and even now as we're speaking, regarding the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago and the need for change.
The members of the cabinet have to be drawn from either the House of Representatives or the Senate. So the members of cabinet can only come from the legislature. So that's the first issue we're looking at in terms of the origin of the cabinet. There's no constitutional provision for membership of the cabinet, even a proportion of the cabinet, to be drawn from people who do not have the position as members of parliament. So that's the first issue. The second one is the question about the size. Because Trinidad and Tobago has an inordinately huge cabinet. And this is something that spans all political parties. It isn't particular to this party or the one that was there before, the one that will be there 5 years later when someone is listening to this. At this point in time, I think our cabinet is about 25 people, okay? And 2 years ago, it was 30 people. And heaven knows what it will be in 2 years' time. But that is literally preposterous when you consider the size of the cabinets of other countries. So So in the United States, which is 330 million people, the cabinet is less than 20 people. Okay, in Jamaica it's 16 people. And you could go around the world and do a comparative study, and it's really kind of shocking. What do we need so many ministers for? What do they all do? And then the third issue is the whole question of the function. How do the people function as officers in cabinet, and how does the cabinet function itself? And this is where we come to the kind of the heart of the thing, and it's burning, and it's fascinating, because the cabinet, the last time they did a statistical survey on it, the cabinet makes in the course of a year, they meet once a week on a Thursday, we know. Thursday around lunchtime, I think it's 1 o'clock, something, so they meet around lunchtime on a Thursday for a couple of hours a week. Cabinet, the last time a survey was done, makes 4,000 decisions a year. Now ask yourself this thing. A year is 52 weeks. 52 weeks, dividing it to 4,000, we're talking about 80-something decisions a week. 80-something decisions a week. Any of the listeners and the viewers looking at this, particularly the young people, the concerned citizens, what kind of meeting could be held for 2 hours long that could decide 75 and 80 things? So we really have to get down. The quantity of the thing has an impact on the quality of the thing. The number of decisions that the cabinet has to make has an impact, a real impact, on the quality of the decision making. This is why so often when we have national crises may emerge from time to time around this issue or that issue, and you get some public official on the defense under pressure from the media or the political opposition or whatever, and you very often hear them say, well, in fact, cabinet approved XYZ on ABC date. And me, as a critic, as a commentator, from the time I hear that you haven't got a legal explanation, you haven't got a financial explanation, you haven't got a technical explanation, you haven't done any research, your answer is that the big people in the big room said it was okay to do it. And I know that in that big room there are 4,000 decisions a year, 75 decisions a week. And really, when we come down to it, we get back to the question. The cabinet members are drawn from the parliament. There are too many of them. It's not even to say you're drawing a cabinet of 10 people or 12 people. You're drawing a cabinet of 20-something and 30-something people. And then you're putting them into a room. And again, another dimension of the thing. How size affects quantity, affects quality. If it's a small group of people who work well together, 4 people or 5 people who have worked closely for a number of years, they trust each other. I know your strengths and weaknesses, you know mine, and we have that sort of solid working relationship as 4 or 5 close colleagues. It's one thing to burden a body like that with serious decision making. Could you imagine a body with 25 and 30 people trying to come to a decision? How do they do it? I suspect, I don't know, because I've never been a member of cabinet, but some of you looking have been. I suspect that they have a lot of horse trading and stuff that gets rubber stamped and stuff that gets shuttered through, and deals are made. If you support me, I'll support you, and so on and so on. And this is why we have this sort of turmoil in terms of how our system of laws and constitutionally and so how it all works, and it doesn't work very well. These are some of the perspectives I wanted to bring here, so I thank you again.
Afra, given some of the concerns that you've raised, do you believe that we have enough oversight in our parliamentary processes?
Well, there has been a substantial improvement in terms of budgetary oversight and the oversight of some of the state agencies within the last 2 or 3 years. There's been a substantial improvement, and Parliament itself has improved access to the information coming out of that process of oversight. Having said that, there's a conceptual difficulty because the parliamentary committees, the joint select committees, and the parliamentary accounts, enterprises committees, and all of these committees are comprised of members of parliament. And as we discussed in the last segue, those members of parliament are themselves, by and large, members of cabinet. So you have the paradox or the conundrum where a joint select committee will be assembled to examine this issue or that agency, and there's some pressing issues that the public wants to hear about and so on. And you could have the spectacle of either a person who is closely associated with the whole agency sitting in the same committee in a sort of an attempted oversight of that agency, or even more likely, somebody who was directly responsible for that agency in the last parliament, in other words, the last rounds, when that government was in power, raising troubling questions. And if you think about it, and I do, a lot of those troubling questions go right back to when they were running. They had responsibility. So there's a sort of a slightly ungainly aspect to the thing in that how hard are these questions really being asked? If we could just go a little further and make the point that so many times we listen to these parliamentary PAC and the parliamentary oversight committees, joint select committees on special issues, and telling findings are made on lack of accounts and lack of contracts and mismanagement and so on. I remember there was one case recently, I can't remember the name of the state agency. The state agency had a contract to develop a particular piece of land or a particular building, and they gave 2 contracts for the exact same amount of money to 2 different contractors to do the same job. And that's something that happened in this country a few years ago. How many years ago, I don't remember. But the point is that you can have absurd things happening and nobody's charged. You have accounting officers who are responsible and nobody's charged. So, and this is really the question to answer your point about oversight. We have these revelations, and it's a lot better than what existed in the bad old days. But we need to go to the next level and get a level of accountability and responsibility and consequence.
What you were describing in terms of the parliamentary process mirrors what could be termed interlocking directorships in the private sector concept.
Yes. There was a Parliamentary Accounts Enterprises Committee, I think it was in February of 2013, they gave a report. It was chaired by a particular person who's now in the cabinet. He was in the opposition at the time. And they were examining, it is a 2011 hearing, they were examining the accounts, the audited accounts of Caribbean Airlines for 2008. So there we have it. A 2011 hearing to examine the 2008 accounts for the Caribbean Airlines Limited, which is a wholly owned state enterprise. I think Jamaica has 9% or something. And that report wasn't published until February of 2013. But what was very interesting in the report, so right away in relation to Caribbean Airlines, you have a tragic mismatch of dates and accountability and oversight. But what was very interesting in the report was one of the things that the chairman made a point, very painfully. He made the point that they need to have the accounts of the state enterprises to be able to do their work. I couldn't agree more. He made the point that the chairman of the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee, as chairman, he had written to all the state enterprises, asking them to submit their audited accounts by a particular date. And tragically, the chairman noted in that report that less than 10% of the state enterprises had even bothered to reply. So now we come to a question of, is it tail wagging the dog? Aretha Franklin, who's zooming who? What is really going on? Because if the parliamentary chairman could be writing to a state enterprise, which is supposed to be the junior party anything, and they could just ignore that, we really have a question of who is running this place. It's a very serious question of oversight. I could talk about the question of interlocking directorships, which is important, an important conceptual thing to bring on the table here. Because when you talk about corporate governance in the private sector, one of the concerns, contemporary concerns, is the concern about interlocking directorships. Can there be groups of people who have particular interests and particular desires, who set things up so that they are actually in control of swaths of companies, and they do that to the detriment of shareholders and consumers and workers? That's one of the concepts of the interlocking directorship. And one of the famous American jurists, Louis Brandeis, in 1914, made the point that what was offensive, particularly offensive about interlocking directorships, is that in fact it invokes the notion that a person cannot serve 2 masters. So therefore it's offensive to have someone who is a director of company A, which is in competition with company B, and they're also on the board of directors of company B. It's regarded as an offense. And in fact, in some parts of America, it's illegal. Now, here we have to step back from that interlocking directorships segue and talk about our constitutional arrangements, the 3 limbs. They're not in competition, obviously. They're all supposed to be helping to run the state smoothly in our mutual collective benefit. But there's supposed to be a certain amount of tension, which very closely resembles competition, which really raises the pregnant question of, can someone properly be a sworn member of cabinet and a sworn member of the legislature and a sworn member of a joint select committee examining a body that cabinet just appointed that board. How critical can that person be? And if that person can't be very critical, or those persons can't be very critical, what are we really doing? So it's time to re-examine and to put some of these notions forward to be challenged and re-examined.
So you've talked about the fact that there should be these necessary tensions.
Yes.
For the apparatus of the state.
Absolutely.
To work very well. So what, in your view, then, are the implications for the quality of representation as practice, as has become the norm, that as is our system?
You use the word representation. And of course, we're sitting today in the Parliament filming this important show. And the senior body of the Parliament is called the House of Representatives. There are 41 members of the House of Representatives representing 41 constituencies in our republic. And when there are elections, people go out and vote for a representative for their area. Of course, there's another version of what takes place. There are many versions in Trinidad and Tobago, and another version says they don't vote for anything like that. They vote for a party. So they vote for a party of this color, or they vote for a party of that color. But the fact is that under our system, those members of Parliament, the members of the House of Representatives, are supposed to represent their constituents. That is the oath of office that they take, that is embedded in our Constitution. Unfortunately or fortunately, the system we are operating is one in which if you vote for the most popular person in your area where you live, and that person wins their seat, and their party does very, very well, and they win the national elections, and out of the 41 seats, they may get 28, 29, 30 seats. They have a commanding presence. They won the election. That MP who has done very, very well, 9 out of 10 chances that person is going to get a job in cabinet as an important minister and is instantly going to become unavailable to you. They will change their cell phone number. They will not come to the constituency office, and they are going to become invisible to you. So you have representatives who are very visible because we always see them on TV at some press conference or cutting a ribbon or turning a sod or something. But in terms of representation, which is meant to be the purpose of the exercise, it's lacking. So the very operation of the system dilutes the quality of the representation. So this is another one of the paradoxes that we have to recognize it and start thinking about what can we do differently. Constitutional reform is one of the things that is discussed from time to time, and this is part of the discourse.
And as you said, a lot of discussion has taken place by various parties over many years on constitutional reform. But what are you, Afra Raymond, proposing now?
First of all, I'd just like to say that I'm not proposing anything. I got a lot of what it is I'm saying from the late Lloyd Best, who's written a lot on this, and there are other people around him. He did a tremendous amount of work. And I think what we need to have as a solid point going forward is that the members of Parliament who are elected to represent a constituency need to be solely representing a constituency. We, the people, you see, there's a way we have these discussions and we blame the political class or the leadership class and the politicians that do this and they are to that. But the reality is that we, the people, many of the people looking at this show, actually believe very strongly that in fact the only person who should have an important office in cabinet here, or this important office in cabinet here, is somebody who was elected. And someone who was just appointed to the Senate shouldn't have those important offices. And much less the notion that I'm about to propose, that in fact the cabinet should be comprised solely of people who do not belong to Parliament. The Parliament needs to represent its constituents. And there needs to be another body, a compact one hopefully, less than a dozen people, that could be a cabinet selected from citizens who are not members of Parliament.
Well, some very, very interesting thoughts on the matter, and I'm sure that we'll continue to engage with you and others. I know you were talking about some statistics, and I can just reiterate them. 1.276 million people live in India, and they have a 26-member cabinet. Yeah. 320 million Americans are managed by a 16-member cabinet. 150 million Nigerians have a 38-member cabinet. And closer to home, 2.95 million Jamaicans are managed by 17 cabinet members. And your point that in Trinidad and Tobago we have 1,367,169 people with 24 cabinet members managing in our affairs. So food for thought, as they would say. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Afra.
very much.
Okay.